Practice makes a man perfect. We all have heard this age old proverb, but does any practice make us perfect? Hello, and a very warm welcome to Evolve in Consciousness. I'm your host Purushottam, and in this channel, we talk about a spectrum of topics which has the potential to enrich your soul, to uplift your mindset and ignite the fire within you, to not only smash those materialistic goals but also to give you nuggets of wisdom which uplift your consciousness so that you become a more fulfilled, a more productive and a more useful human being on this planet. Practice is something which we all have heard about. You need to practice more to get better at things. Put in more hours of work in order for you to improve a particular skill set. But have we deeply pondered upon the aspect that does any kind of practice make us a maestro? Friends, Anders Ericsson, one of the most prominent psychologists in today's century, if I might say, introduced a concept which is well known in the psychological communities, which is known as deliberate practice. Deliberate practice is something which is being followed by the legends. Either they are conscious about it or they are unconscious about it. Now, let me briefly explain to you in layman terms what does deliberate practice mean. Deliberate practice is a practice which is so designed that it focuses in a systematic and a purposeful manner on a particular dimension of your skill set. And the practice is so designed or is so curated that that particular skill set is challenged. That particular skill set is forced to come out of its present zones of complacency. Let me give you a pragmatic example so that you understand what I'm trying to talk about here. Let's say a person wants to be a prolific writer. Now, if he just practices writing, he might go to a certain extent in his skill set. He might reach a certain level of competence in his skill set. But there would come a point in his life where he reaches a plateau. Now, if that plateau is where the conventional practices fail. Because now we are just practicing mechanically. We are not practicing beyond our comfort zones, beyond those invisible fences. Because we are not clear as to what aspect of our skill set we want to improve. Now, if you look at the work of Anders Ericsson, the person who authored the book The Peak, from which plethora of authors took his concepts and made great books like Outliers, The Talent is Overrated. There are many books which talk about his work, but the source of all that work was from Anders Ericsson. In his book Peak, he talks about this concept of the 10,000 hours, wherein he says that if any human being persists in practicing his skill set for a consistent amount of 10,000 hours, which roughly translate into 10 years, he is going to be a legend in his field. Now, the caveat is that not any practice will take you to the status of legendary. This practice which he is referring to is what is known as deliberate practice. Now, let's get back to that practical example. Let's say that you want to be a prolific writer. Now, there is something in your writing skills which you want to improve, which you want to take to the next level. The first step in doing so is to assess your current skill set, assess your own comfort zone in the skill set. Once you do that, you can create a SMART goal for yourself. I'm sure most of you would have heard of what a SMART goal is. Third, you need to practice with mindful attention. Just practicing mechanically won't do you any favor. Fourth, get candid feedback about how you're progressing in that skill set. And in this regard, a competent coach or someone who has been superior in that field of work or study is of prime importance. Having a coach is extremely helpful, because a coach has eyes which we don't. He sees your work through eyes of experience. He can judge what dimensions of your skill set need improvement. Hence, it is uber important and essential that once you get the feedback, then there's this loop which happens, there's this feedback loop which operates. Once you get that feedback, you continuously try to work on that dimension of your skill set. Michael Jordan, the legendary basketball player, he was doing this concept, he was practicing deliberately. In his training regime, the way he had curated his training regime is extremely motivating and inspiring. What he used to do is, he used to block his front vision through a opaque glass covering. So he used to block his front vision and used to dribble the ball and used to practice solitary in his basketball field. The purpose of that practice regime so that he could completely explore his side vision. He relentlessly practiced this regime with utter discipline, and what happened as a product of that, his components, his opponents almost felt that Michael Jordan had eyes back of his head, because he had developed that faculties through this regime of deliberate practice. Now this can be applied to any field, be it music, be it writing, be it public speaking, any field this deliberate practice rule can be applied. And once you start working on deliberate practice, results are bound to come. Because we are always bound to believe that any regular practice will help us grow to the next level. No, that's not the case. Not all practices can take you to the next level. Practices which are curated with the sole intention and purpose that it needs to cater to that skill set, it needs to push you beyond that particular zone in which you are in, at an absolutely narrowed down focus on that skill set. Suppose you are a programmer. What aspect in programming, what minute skill set in programming do you need to improve on? And how can you develop your training, how can you develop your practice regime in such a way that when you practice, you are intentionally getting better at that? Obviously, we are going to fail many number of times. We are going to fail probably countless number of times. But the key here is to persist. The key here is to have grit. Because unless you fail, unless you hit the rock bottom, you won't know what you are doing. You won't know what is the aspect which needs improvement, which has scope of improvement. And once you start ascending beyond your present confines of skill set, then you will start progressing towards mastery level of work. If you are someone who is a tennis player and who has been practicing the same way he was, you are probably not growing, because you need to constantly innovate your practice regime, because every master didn't become a master just like that. He constantly innovated the way he practiced. He constantly changed the way he was working. Because every practice, right, the way the practices are designed, they tend to become mechanical over a period of time. And even without your awareness, you are doing it. But deliberate practice doesn't work like that. Deliberate practice requires your absolute focused attention. And things which are easy to do, those are the things which don't require a lot of mindful attention. But things which require you to move out of your current shackles of complacency, those are the things which require mindful attention. And this is an extremely tedious and mentally exhausting task. And that's why most people don't engage in the art of deliberate practice. But you can ask yourself this question, right? That if I really want to move to a level of mastery in my field of work, isn't this a price which is not much to pay for? Because if this is such a powerful aspect, right, there was a belief system which was widespread in modern society, which said that the brain which we are born with, that is fixed, that is rigid. Now that is completely being debunked now with the thrive of neuroplasticity, with the uproar of the science of neuroplasticity, which foundational premise is based on the fact that the human brain is completely plastic. One can train the brain in a particular way such that it acts in a particular way. The neurons which wire together fire together. So it is such a motivating aspect, right? Because most of us think that we have a limited cognitive bandwidth and we are sort of imprisoned by the genetic signature which we are born with. But that's not the case. There are innumerable books which you can look at. The first book which I said, Peak by Anders Ericsson, the person who started this work of peak performance, he talked about this. And after that, there's a phenomenal book called Talent is Overrated by Jeff Cowan, in which he says that people who are gifted, people who are having that natural talent, that's great. But it's not a necessary that these people will become outrageously successful. That's not the case. The people who have become legends, people who have become outrageously successful, those are the people who have talent as well as that strenuous regime of having a deliberate practice routine. Either they were conscious of it or they were unconscious of it. Let me give you an example from history. Benjamin Franklin, one of the finest writers history has ever produced. You know how he practiced his writing? He used to read the British columns, the British newspapers, and he used to see the way, the structure in which the articles progressed. And he developed his practice regime in such a way that his articles would deliberately be focused on building that organized structure. He was a good writer initially, but he wanted to improve that dimension of his skill set. And because of that teaching which he got from that British columns, he utilized that understanding, he utilized that learning and saw how he can inculcate that skill set in his own skill, right? In his own writing talent. How he can develop himself into a much better writer. Now, history is filled with countless examples of folks who have practiced deliberately. Now, you might be thinking why this concept of deliberate practice is of utter importance. Because we are being brainwashed with this idea that any practice will take your game to the next level. That's not the truth. Practice needs to be curated in the right way. And practice, when you are engaging in a particular practice, you need to seek candid feedback. Without feedback, you probably are moving headlessly without a proper destination. Hence, it is very important to have a coach in whichever skill set you want to progress in. Unless you are someone like Ekalavya, who had the idol of Dronacharya and he had that level of devotion and dedication, discipline to practice. Or you are like Benjamin Franklin, who without a coach was able to develop his skill set. But there's no harm in having a coach, right? And not only a coach, but also someone who has done something of significance in your field of work. Now, not everyone would have access to such folks, so you can always read their books. You can try to go through their mindsets through which they operate. Try to understand the worldview through their eyes. I want to quickly recap the 4 elements of what deliberate practice means. Assess your current limits, set a smart goal, practice with mindful intention. This is extremely important, this step. Just don't mechanically practice a skill. And if you are curating your practice regime deliberately in such a way that it pushes you out of your current shackles of complacency or comfort zone, you won't be able to be unfocused, right? You will have to deliberately focus, because if you are doing something mechanically, that means that is not a deliberate practice, that is a mechanical practice, because it's easy for you. Anything which is demanding of you will be difficult and would demand from you a certain level of focus. And fourth, and the most important, get candid feedback. Now this 4 pillars which I just talked about, it can be applied to any field of work. You can be a chess player, you can be a magician, you can be an engineer, or you can be a computer programmer, or you can be a public leader, right? Or you can be a public speaker who wants to influence people, who wants to elevate people, right? So in any walk of life you might belong to, you can research Anders Ericsson's pioneering work on peak performance. You will be absolutely baffled, amazed, and also motivated when you go through his body of work. Because one thing is very clear, that this whole thing which society sort of sells us, that people are born with genes and people are naturally gifted, it's a complete myth if you go through his field of work. And now the current science of neuroplasticity also confirms that the brain can be trained to do what was once impossible for it. Hence, go through the content of Anders Ericsson, and if you are someone who really wants to take his particular field of work to the next level, start small, start digesting these concepts of deliberate practice. And when you start engaging in deliberate practice, you will obviously fail many a times, but the perseverance is the key. Grit is the key. To always have the drive to move towards the uncomfortable zone, towards zones of resistance, is what makes legends, right? So this is, to start with, this is going to be extremely mentally exhausting, but you really need to persist, and this is backed with neurological scientific evidence, and there is no way that a person will fail practicing this regime. And we can always take the help of folks who have done really well in our field of work, so that we understand from their eyes of experience. I hope this particular concept of deliberate practice made sense to you and resonated with you deeply. I would like to end this video with a quote from the Spartan warriors, which instills me with a sense of passion, which instills me with a sense of enthusiasm. The Spartan warriors say, the person who sweats more in practice bleeds less in war. I'll repeat it. The person who sweats more in practice bleeds less in war. Thank you so much, and if you really enjoyed this video, don't forget to share it with 3 of your friends. Also like and subscribe to this channel if you really enjoy the genre and the content which I am trying to release in this platform. Thank you, and meet you in the next video. Bye.